in the middle of a packed Washington hall. Barack Obama looked Melania Trump dead in the eyes while her sharp attacks on his birth and record still echoed across the room. With a calm, deadly smile, he tore through her perfect image, mocking the elegant First Lady act she had built for years, then dropped a bomb that froze the entire audience in shock. He had seen secret documents that could completely destroy her husband's public myth and expose the ugly truths their family had been hiding for years. The sun was dropping low over Washington, D.C., casting that warm orange glow across the city as people filed into the National Leadership Forum. The big hall at the convention center buzzed with quiet energy. Tonight wasn't just another fancy dinner with polite speeches. Everyone knew it because Barack Obama and Melania Trump were sitting side by side at the main table just a few feet apart. Obama leaned back in his chair, calm as ever, legs crossed, wearing that familiar half-smile like nothing could rattle him. Melania sat straight, elegant in her dark dress, smiling for the cameras, but her fingers tapped lightly on the table. The host finally stepped up and introduced the evening. After some quick thanks, he turned to Melania. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the former First Lady, Melania Trump." The applause rose as she stood and walked to the podium with that graceful stride she's known for. She adjusted the mic, looked out at the crowd, and started off smooth and polished. She thanked the organizers, spoke about the importance of strong leadership, and said unity was what America needed most right now. People clapped politely. It felt like a normal speech so far. Then her tone shifted. She leaned forward just a little. "Today our country faces serious problems," she said, her voice clear with that slight accent. "Inflation is through the roof. The cost of living is crushing families. More than 60% of Americans wake up every day worried about paying their bills. These aren't small issues. They didn't happen overnight." The room got quieter. Heads nodded in some sections. She paused, letting it sink in. "Bad leadership and false promises brought us here. Someone has to be held responsible for the wrong decisions that are still hurting people." That's when the air in the hall changed. Melania scanned the crowd, then dropped the line everyone felt coming. Some so-called leaders have even had their own backgrounds questioned, whether they truly belong here, whether their stories were real from the start. She didn't say Obama's name, but she didn't have to. The birther jab landed hard. Gasps rippled through the audience. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone in the back muttered, "Damn!" Reporters' pens moved faster. Cameras zoomed in tighter on the stage. Obama sat completely still in his chair. He didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He just kept that slight, calm smile on his face, hands folded in his lap, eyes locked forward. Melania finished her speech with a few more lines about strength and truth, then stepped back from the podium to solid but uneasy applause. She walked back to her seat beside Obama, chin up, trying to look confident. As she sat down, Obama turned his head slightly and gave her a polite nod, like a gentleman acknowledging the speaker. But his eyes told a different story, sharp, focused, and ready. Before the host could move on to the next speaker, a man in the third row stood up slowly. He was a former senior staffer who had worked in the Obama White House years ago. Someone handed him the wireless microphone. The entire room turned toward him. "Mrs. Trump," he asked, his voice strong and clear, cutting through the tension, "you spoke about bad leadership and false promises that are still hurting American families. You mentioned inflation and the daily struggles people face. Are you directly saying that former President Obama is responsible for what Americans are dealing with today?" The question landed like a bomb. Gasps rippled across the hall. A few people sat up straighter. Reporters in the back row started typing furiously on their laptops. Melania paused for just a second, her posture stiffening. Then she leaned toward the nearest mic at the table and answered without hesitation. "Yes," she said firmly, her accent sharp and confident. "Past decisions created these problems. When leaders spent more time on grand speeches, photo ops, and building their image instead of delivering real results for working families, this is exactly what you get. Image over action. That's the clear difference between the administrations. People are paying the price every single day at the grocery store, at the gas pump, and in their monthly bills. Her words hit hard. She didn't shout, but the comparison was unmistakable. The room exploded into low murmurs and whispers. Some guests nodded in agreement while others shook their heads in disbelief. A woman in the second row leaned over to her husband and said, "She really just went there." The tension in the air grew thicker. Cameras panned between Melania and the empty space where Obama sat. You could almost hear hearts beating faster. Through it all, Barack Obama remained seated. He didn't interrupt. He didn't sigh or roll his eyes, but his right hand slowly tightened on the armrest of his chair, knuckles pressing white for a brief moment before relaxing again. His eyes narrowed slightly, sharp and focused, locked on Melania with that quiet intensity he was famous for. He looked calm on the outside, but everyone close enough could sense the shift. The former staffer who had asked the question sat back down, nodding to himself like he knew he'd just opened the floodgates. The host wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and jumped in quickly, his voice cracking just a little. "Thank you for that question. Let's continue the program. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to former President Barack Obama." Obama stood up smoothly, adjusting his suit jacket with one hand. The room fell into a heavy silence again. Every eye followed him as he walked past Melania's seat. He paused for a split second and gave her a short, polite nod, respectful on the surface but carrying real weight. Melania's jaw tightened as she looked straight ahead. Obama continued to the podium, took his place behind the microphone, and then he said nothing. For a full 30 seconds, he simply stood there, looking out at the crowd. No words, just silence. The kind that made the air feel heavy and electric at the same time. People shifted in their seats. Melania's fingers gripped the table edge. Cameras stayed glued to his face. The quiet built until it felt almost unbearable. Then Obama's lips curved into that famous half-smile, the one that could disarm a room or cut through nonsense in a single second. "Well," he said in a calm, almost casual tone, "that was quite a speech." A few nervous chuckles broke out across the hall, but they died quickly. Obama stood behind the podium, still wearing that calm half-smile, and looked out at the crowd like he had all the time in the world. "Let me start by saying this," he began, his voice steady and warm. "We all love this country. Every single person in this room wants America to succeed. That's something we share, no matter which side we're on." A few people nodded. The room felt a little less tense for a second. But Obama wasn't finished. He leaned forward slightly, his tone still friendly but sharper now. "But caring about this country also means being honest. Sometimes honesty makes people uncomfortable, and that's okay." He paused, letting his words settle. Then he continued, "It's interesting how people like to talk about leadership, truth, and responsibility. But it gets even more interesting when the same people forget how those things actually work in real life." Without raising his voice or pointing fingers, Obama brought up the topic everyone was waiting for. "I remember a time when a lot of noise was made about whether I was really born in this country. People questioned my birth certificate, my background, even whether I belonged here at all." The hall went dead quiet again. Everyone knew exactly what he was talking about, the birther movement. Obama turned his head slowly and looked straight at Melania. Their eyes met. "And some of those claims," he said clearly, "came from the same household sitting right here tonight." The words landed hard. A wave of awkward laughter rippled through the audience, mixed with gasps. Some people clapped nervously. Melania's body went stiff in her chair. Her smile disappeared completely. She stared back at him, her face tight, but she didn't say anything yet. Before the moment could pass, Melania suddenly leaned toward her microphone at the table and cut in. "That's not appropriate," she said, her voice sharp and quick. "This is disrespectful." The room froze. Cameras swung between the two of them. Obama tilted his head slightly, still calm as ever, and replied without missing a beat. "When people twist stories, spread rumors, and attack someone's identity for years, That's disrespectful too, he said evenly. But I guess it's only inappropriate when the truth gets too close to home. He didn't stop there. Obama kept going in that same measured voice. You talk about image and presence, how leaders should look, how they should speak. That's fine. But what about real integrity? A leader's power doesn't come from perfect camera angles or expensive clothes. It comes from being honest with the American people, even when it's hard. Scattered applause started breaking out across the hall. At first, it was just a few claps, then more joined in. People were clearly reacting to his words. Melania sat there gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her jaw was clenched. Then Melania suddenly shot up from her chair. The sound of it scraping against the floor cut through the room like a knife. Her face was flushed, and her voice came out loud and shaking. "You have no right to talk to me that way," she snapped, pointing toward the podium. "You twist everything. You're insulting my husband, insulting me, and making jokes about serious matters in front of all these people." The hall went completely silent. Cameras flashed wildly. No one expected her to explode like this. Obama stood behind the podium, still calm, hands resting lightly on the edges. He looked at her directly and replied in that steady, measured voice. "I just asked a question, Melania, but it seems that question struck a real nerve." He paused for a second, then added, "You know, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And before you start questioning other people's stories, maybe you should check the missing pages in your own." The words landed heavy. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Some people leaned forward, eyes wide. Then Obama dropped something that made the entire room freeze. "I've kept quiet for years," he said, his tone still calm but carrying real weight. "But I have seen documents, things that would make your husband's public image look very different if they ever came out." He didn't say exactly what they were. He didn't need to. A former aide who had worked closely with Obama years ago sat just a few rows back. The man gave a slow, visible nod as if confirming he knew exactly what documents Obama was talking about. Gasps filled the hall. Reporters scribbled notes like crazy. Melania's eyes widened. She gripped the back of her chair, her voice rising and cracking. "You're threatening me," she said, almost shouting now. "This is completely out of line." She looked like she was barely holding it together, her usual poise cracking right in front of everyone. Obama shook his head slowly, still completely composed. "No, Melania, I'm not threatening you. I'm reminding you. When you drag other people down with lies, sometimes the truth fights back." He leaned slightly closer to the mic, his voice dropping just a little. "And maybe if people understood how much real influence you actually have in that White House, they'd be asking very different questions." Then he added one quiet line that hit like a bomb. "Especially when your own family has said things in private that don't match the public story." The audience sucked in a collective breath. The room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. No one dared move. Melania stood there, mouth slightly open, completely stunned. Melania wasn't ready to back down. Even with her hands still shaking, she stepped closer to the table microphone, her voice rising again. "You talk about truth and honesty," she said, pointing toward Obama. "But what about your legacy? The failed policies, the broken promises, the inflation you left behind that's still hurting so many families today. That's what people remember." She tried to sound strong, but her words came out desperate, like she was grasping for anything to fight back with. Obama stayed behind the podium, completely unfazed. He looked at her with that steady gaze and replied in a calm, almost casual tone. "Interesting point, but last I checked, the people leading this country in 2025 aren't wearing my name. They're not following my policies either." The line hit the room hard. Several people laughed sharply and a wave of applause started building. Melania's face tightened. She opened her mouth to respond but couldn't find the words fast enough. Then Obama leaned into the microphone and delivered the moment that changed everything. "I stayed quiet for years when lies were spread about me," he said, his voice low and serious. "When people questioned my birth, my family, my loyalty to this country. I had the proof the whole time. the real birth certificate, and plenty of other documents that could have ended the conversation instantly. But I chose not to play that game. He paused, letting the weight sink in. Suddenly, a former journalist who had covered the White House stood up in the middle of the audience. "I saw the original documents myself," the man said loudly, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "They were real, no question about it." The room erupted in murmurs and gasps. Melania looked like she'd been slapped. Her eyes glistened as she fought back tears. Her voice cracked completely when she finally spoke. "You wouldn't dare," she said, almost whispering at first, then louder. "You wouldn't dare bring all that up." Tears welled up in her eyes. For the first time that night, the elegant composure she was known for was completely gone. She looked broken, standing there trembling in front of hundreds of people. Obama looked at her one last time, his expression calm but firm. In a deep, steady voice that carried through every speaker in the hall, he said, "Respect isn't demanded, Melania. It's earned by truth, not by appearances." He stepped away from the podium, adjusted his jacket, and began walking back toward his seat. The audience rose to their feet in a thunderous wave of applause. The clapping grew louder and louder, filling the entire hall. Some people even cheered. Obama didn't smile or wave. He just kept walking with that quiet dignity. Melania slowly sank back into her chair, her face pale white, like all the energy had been drained out of her. She stared blankly at the table, hands folded tightly in her lap. Obama didn't look back even once. He simply walked out through the side door as the applause continued behind him. The hall was still buzzing as the event wrapped up, but Melania slipped away quickly through a side door. She found a quiet restroom near the back and stood alone in front of the large mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes red, makeup slightly smudged, shoulders slumped. She placed both hands on the counter and whispered to herself, voice barely audible, "Why did I push so far?" For the first time that night, there were no cameras, no audience, just her and the weight of everything that had happened. She took a deep breath, fixed her hair, and tried to pull herself together, but the confident woman who had walked onto that stage earlier was gone. Outside in the dimly lit hallway, Obama walked slowly beside one of his longtime aides. The aide looked at him and said quietly, "That got pretty intense in there, sir." Obama nodded, staring straight ahead. "I didn't want to hurt her," he said softly. But the truth had to land where it belonged. You can't keep building on lies and expect it to hold up forever. His voice was calm, almost regretful, but steady. He wasn't celebrating. He just looked tired, like a man who had done what needed to be done. In the days that followed, Melania stayed out of the spotlight. She canceled several public appearances and focused quietly on her charity work, keeping a low profile. Those close to her said she seemed more reflective, less quick to speak in interviews. Meanwhile, Obama sat down for a short interview a few days later. When asked about that night, he gave a small smile and said, "Grace under pressure. That's what matters. You can disagree with people. You can defend yourself. But when you lose your dignity in the process, you've already lost more than the argument." His words spread fast online and on every news channel. Months later, both of them ended up at another major event in New York. The room was full of important people, but when Obama and Melania spotted each other across the hall, everything went quiet for a moment. No words, no confrontation. Obama simply gave a small, polite nod. Melania paused, then returned the nod. Respectful but distant. It was a silent understanding between two people who had faced each other in the fire and come out changed. No one else in the room fully understood how powerful that small moment really was. In the end, the night at the National Leadership Forum became one of those stories people still talk about. Not because of the politics or the drama, but because of what it showed. Truth doesn't need to shout, it stands. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned through honesty and composure. As the cameras turned off and the lights went down, Barack Obama stepped out into the cool Washington night. He walked alone toward his car, hands in his pockets, back straight, moving with that same calm confidence. The storm had passed, but his message remained, clear, steady, and unbreakable. In a noisy world full of anger and blame, sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never has to raise itself at all.